Now, the Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago is partnering with the Gender and Child Affairs Division of the Office of the Prime Minister to raise awareness and sensitize the public about child abuse and ways to prevent it. And so joining us this morning is Acting Deputy Director of Care Services at the Children's Authority, Mr. Marlon Bascombe, to speak more about this issue. Mr. Bascombe, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Of course, it's always a pleasure.
Yes, thank you.
Just to ground us before we get into the conversation, just tell us exactly what is child abuse.
Well, essentially, child abuse focuses on those issues where children find themselves in situations that are not ideal. So abuse focuses on things like physical abuse, sexual abuse, even issues such as financial abuse or neglect and general maltreatment of children. Yeah. So we focus on those areas, and unfortunately we have a significant problem in Trinidad and Tobago that we want to address, and this is why, especially in this month, but all the time, we want to remind the public that child protection is everyone's business.
Yeah. Now you mentioned at the top physical abuse and sexual abuse, we know those, but you mentioned something as well, financial abuse, that is something that happens.
Yes, it's something that happens. It may be withholding appropriate resources for children. It may be even educational neglect in terms of denying them access to school, things that are their right. So all of those things also accumulate part of that umbrella of abuse.
Yeah. What about grooming? Is grooming a form of abuse, or is that just part of something that children are, subjected to?
It would be considered abuse as well, especially if it's going to lead towards further sexual abuse in the future, because you're grooming them for a specific purpose. Usually it's for sexual abuse, or you're waiting to initiate a particular level of relationship as soon as they become adults, as soon as they turn 18.
Yeah. Now, I know that I understand that physical and sexual abuse may be, some of the key ones, the critical ones that the authority sees. Are there any certain statistics that you can share in terms of, where this falls in terms of the prevalence of that type of abuse?
Well, physical and sexual abuse are literally numbers 1 and 2 with respect to what we see. And then right after that comes neglect and abandonment. So without having these statistics in front of me, I can say that, yeah, it's very, very high on the spectrum of what we see.
Yeah. Neglect and abandonment, is it as simple as saying the parent or the guardian left the home, or are there other aspects of that form of abuse?
So in terms of not just left the home, but the parent may still be in the home, but very often we may see situations where the children are left alone on a daily basis to fend for themselves. The children may find themselves walking the streets or begging neighbors for food, different things like that. The children are not going to school. So you see a lot of those issues as well. Then, of course, in some instances, you may see persons may bring children to, for example, the hospital and leave them there, or to a police station and say that they are unable to care for them anymore. So these situations also do happen.
When those situations happen, is it that the authority steps in and finds a home until another guardian can step in and take them, or do they become part of the system?
Well, I won't want to say become part of the system, but we will always act in the best interest of the child. So, of course, our search would begin with seeking for other appropriate family members, anyone who may be able and be a fit person to take care of this child. Failing that, we may then try to seek options within the foster care system. And then at that point, we may then look to one of those community residences that the public knows as children's homes to seek appropriate placement.
Yeah. Is there ever going to be a time when they enter the system for adoption, or how does that process take place?
With respect to adoption, one of the key things is that the parents do have to essentially give up their parental rights, and that in itself is a legal process. But the good thing is that we do have a pool of persons who are just ready and waiting to be prospective adopters, and we would want to continue to encourage the public to step forward to be potential adoptive parents, as well as to be potential foster parents as well. So we would really, especially in this month, want to encourage persons to come forward. There are a lot of children that will need that type of familial support. Yes.
Now let's go back to neglect, because I think there's a thin line between leaving them maybe during working hours when the parents are at work and leaving them to wander on the street. So for example, and this is not the ideal situation at all, right? A child should be monitored at all times. But SCA children are home, school is closed now, right?
Yes.
The mother or father has nowhere to put their children. Leaving them at home during the working hours of the parent, is that a form of neglect? Should we ensure that there's somebody at home with them?
We really always should ensure that there is someone at home, it's really not advisable to leave children home alone, especially children who are under the age of 15, under the age of, what you may consider responsibility. Now, some persons may say, but my 10-year-old is very responsible. But still, that's a risk, and we really want to encourage the public to avoid that risk as far as possible.
Yeah. So we don't, let's say mommy doesn't have an older guardian. Is it then we now look at babysitters? We look at some, because I mean, we have grown up with, the neighbor just taking a look, if
True.
it is you see anything, just let me know,
True.
So can that work as well, or somebody has to be in the home with the child?
As far as possible, you would want someone responsible and trustworthy, who you're familiar with, who your child is familiar with. As far as possible, you would want that ideal situation.
In the home?
In the home.
Okay.
Right? Or even if you have to leave your child with someone that you are comfortable with their home or their space, and that the person is not supervising too many children at once. So you just want to ensure that as far as possible, the children are left in appropriate care.
Yeah.
Yes?
Now let's talk about Child Abuse Awareness Month. Of course, it's the month of April.
Yes.
I understand that the Children's Authority are doing some sort of outreach initiatives. Can we speak some more to that?
Yes, definitely. So, of course, during this month and all the time, we want to remind the public child protection is everyone's business. But in this month, we want to make sure that we highlight specifically the issues that we are having, that we are seeing, the number of cases that we are seeing. And so we are engaged in this campaign to just, again, continue to bring awareness. I know it's us always beating the same drum, but it's an important drum for us to make sure we beat. So we want to make sure that persons are aware of the different types of abuse, as we were just discussing, and persons are aware of what they can do if they do encounter situations where they believe a child may be in an abusive scenario.
Yeah. What do they do then?
Well, the first thing, if you see something, say something. So it's important to contact the Children's Authority at 996 or 800-2014. It's even important to contact the police. We have a very good relationship with the Child Protection Unit of the police service. So if you do report to the police, they will always call us in once children are involved. And of course, once reports come into us, we also report to the police, and we try to work simultaneously to ensure that the best outcomes are realized.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, that outreach that you're having tomorrow, tell us about it. Tell us where and when.
So tomorrow, we are with the Office of the Prime Minister, and essentially what we are looking at is there's going to be a booth at City Gate. I think it's from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. And we're going to be partnering with them to share information, share flyers, have discussions with persons. I encourage persons who may have more specific questions to please ask them when you get there. Ask about becoming a foster parent. Ask about the adoption process. Ask again, more about what we do at the Children's Authority. How is it we investigate? What happens when someone says a child needs to be assessed? All these kind of questions that the public may have, feel free to come down and ask us.
Yeah. You mentioned a partnership with the police service. At what point does the Children's Authority step in if somebody goes to the police station and reports an incident of abuse against a child?
Well, it's essentially immediately. So if you go to the police station and make that report, within a very short period of time, the police themselves will also contact the Children's Authority to indicate, okay, we've received this particular report. Sometimes they may ask for support when they go out on a home visit. So we may go with them, or depending on the case, our emergency response team may go with them. Sometimes they may ask us to conduct a suitability assessment on another family member's home. That's us making sure that the secondary family member's space is appropriate. So we work with them in tandem. And while they may be conducting a criminal investigation, we may also be conducting a social investigation. And as needed, we would share information and so on.
So while this investigation is ongoing, what happens to the child? Because I'm guessing that the child may not be able to stay in the home in which the abuse happened. So what happens to the child at that point?
No, well, as I mentioned, in terms of sometimes they would call us to do a suitability assessment.
Right,
so
yes.
the first priority is ensuring that the child is in a place of safety. So whether that is at another relative's space or whether that is in one of the community residences that we were speaking of earlier. So first and foremost, the child has to be in a place of safety before anything else can happen. And once the child is safe, all other inquiries will proceed.
Yeah.
Yes.
How can I phrase this question? So what I want to ask you is, What are the steps to get a child to open up, right? Because you know sometimes when a child is abused, especially sexually abused, the perpetrator instills that sort of fear where they threaten them and they tell them, if you tell somebody I'm going to harm you, I'm going to harm a family member. Are there steps or processes that you can teach a child or an adult can teach a child in terms of how to come to someone who is older to report that sort of abuse?
Right. So this is where first and most important is the relationship that you are going to have with your child. So your child has to, number one, feel comfortable coming to you to discuss virtually any topic, inclusive of these topics. And this is where we would encourage persons to ensure to teach children, okay, this is an okay touch. This is a touch that makes me feel comfortable. This is a not okay touch. No one is supposed to touch me here. This is not appropriate, right? And also have that knowledge instilled in them that you can come to mommy, you can come to daddy, you can go to your teachers and so on to describe any situation that you are not comfortable with. So that's the first thing, that's the baseline. The secondary thing is it's important for us to be aware sometimes of the non-verbal signs of abuse. So if a child who's normally active is suddenly very, very quiet, we want to start paying attention. If a child is suddenly fearful of a particular person or doesn't want to go to a particular place, we want to pay attention to that as well. So it then becomes dependent on the relationship that you have with the child that would allow for you to have that conversation, which can be a difficult conversation. What happens then is that if no one has that relationship with the child or no one is able to have that conversation, in our case, this is where our professionals, our psychologists, our caseworkers may then be the one to have to establish a rapport with the child and to attempt to glean information through conversation in terms of what happened, why were you uncomfortable, what exactly is the situation. So it can be a difficult process, but the baseline is having that rapport, having that relationship with your child.
Yeah. Also, too, I understand that there are some euphemisms that we use to identify certain body parts. What are the thoughts on that? Are we just supposed to label it as it is, or can we go back to using those euphemisms?
No, you want to use the appropriate names, even if it's age-appropriate names, for body parts. So you don't want, for example, to be calling things like cookie. And then when the child is trying to indicate that, someone touched my cookie and it's an abusive situation, sometimes these things happen and you're just not aware.
Yes.
Because you hear the word cookie instead of the appropriate term. So you want to use, yes, it's age appropriate, but you want to use the appropriate terms for body parts, including genitalia. Yeah.
Now, as we are in the Easter season, a lot of families will be going out, going to the parks, beaches, that sort of thing. How do we keep children safe in those environments?
Key word is supervision. Key word is always supervision. So whether we go to the beach, whether we go to the park, we want to ensure that, number one, there's a great ratio of adults and children. And number two, that there are persons who, in the same way that we would have designated drivers, there are persons who their focus is always going to be on the children, especially near the beach, near the river, any pool or any situation like that, because unfortunately these are the times where we see more incidences of accidents happening, of drownings, and all of these things that we don't want to hear. So the key word is always going to be supervision, right? One thing I always like to raise as well, even in this time, online supervision is always critical.
Yes.
Is always critical. So, and it's very difficult. You may think your child is playing a game, not knowing that there's instant messaging on that game, and someone, slides into the DMs, as I said earlier, and you may not know. So then you may not know who is having conversations with your child, especially if that conversations are inappropriate. So be very vigilant.
Going back a bit, you were sharing some signs or symptoms that a child may be abused. Will they also act out what they see or act out what is experiencing or what they are experiencing at that point in time?
Yes, definitely. Thank you for bringing me back. So if you see, for example, a quiet child suddenly becoming very active, suddenly talking back, being rude, if you start seeing sexually inappropriate behavior or sexually suggestive play with the toys and so on, again, those are signs for you to start to inquire in terms of what is happening. If you suddenly see a child who is past the stage of bedwetting doing it again, if you're seeing the child complaining of nightmares, or you suddenly start seeing poor hygiene, different things like that, or even just a general hostility, all of these things may be signs that something is wrong, especially if it is out of line with the child's previous behavior. Yeah.
Nice. And I just wanted you to remind us where and what time the outreach is taking place tomorrow.
So the outreach tomorrow is at City Gate, Port of Spain, from 2 p.m. and I believe it's until 5 p.m. Feel free, come down, ask questions, and there will be further outreaches throughout this month and ongoing.
And just remind us what numbers we can call if we ever witness or be going to report an issue of child abuse.
So always, if you see something, do say something, 996 or 800-2014. Again, I want to remind the public, child protection is everyone's business. Yes?
And I know this is an ongoing series, Marlon, so I know we're going to continue the conversation sometime again. But let me thank you so much for coming in this morning and starting the conversation, of course, as we are in this very important month. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And that was Acting Deputy Director of Care Services at the Children's Authority of TNT, Mr. Marlon Bascombe, just sharing an outreach, a very important outreach that's taking place tomorrow afternoon in City Gate. On the Now Morning Show, we're going to take a break and be right back. Stay with us.